Why did my dad hide my real mother for 16 years? I wasn't supposed to be in the attic that day. It was late October, the kind of crisp afternoon where sunlight slants through dust motes like golden glitter. I was looking for the Halloween decorations, old plastic pumpkins and tangled spiderwebs, when I stumbled upon a box I'd never seen before, wedged between brittle suitcases and a broken rocking horse. It was labeled, books. But as I lifted the lid, the first thing I saw wasn't a novel. It was a photograph, curled and faded with age. The picture showed a young woman in a summer dress, her arm looped around a toddler. Me. But the woman wasn't my mother. At least, not the one I had known all my life. My mother, according to my dad, had died in a car accident when I was barely 2 years old. This woman had long auburn hair and deep, tired eyes. There was something about her face, soft, yet haunted, that stopped me cold. The back of the photo had a date written in pen, July 3, 2009. I had just turned 3. That night, I waited until my dad had gone to sleep. I pulled out my old baby album, the one we kept on the living room shelf. Page after page showed pictures of birthdays, holidays, park visits, but never this woman. My supposed mother, the one who died, looked nothing like her. In fact, she was barely in any of the pictures at all. Most of them just showed me and my dad. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, that this wasn't just a forgotten photo or a misremembered face. This was a secret, one that someone had worked very hard to bury. I kept the photo with me, hidden in a math textbook. I stared at it during class, trying to recall anything, any tiny memory of the woman in the photo. A scent, a song, a lullaby. But there was nothing, just a blank space where a mother's love should have been. Then, 2 days later, something even stranger happened. It was after school, raining slightly. I was halfway down the block when I noticed a woman across the street, standing still beneath a red umbrella. She was looking at me. I looked back. Her face was hard to make out beneath the downpour, but she didn't move. She just stood there, eyes locked with mine, until the bus passed between us. When it was gone, so was she. That night, I dreamed of the woman in the photo. Not the one with the red umbrella, but the one with the auburn hair. In the dream, she reached for me through a fog, whispering my name over and over. Except it wasn't my name. It was a nickname I hadn't heard since I was very little. Birdie. I woke up in a cold sweat. For the first time in years, I began to question everything. My dad's stories, the woman in the photo, the baby album with all its gaps. I didn't know it yet, but that single photograph had opened the first door, and the next one would reveal far more than I was prepared to see. The woman in the red coat didn't just appear once. Over the next 2 weeks, I saw her again, twice. The second time, I was leaving the library after a tutoring session. It was one of those late fall evenings when the sun dipped quickly behind the trees, shadows stretching like long fingers across the pavement. I had barely stepped onto the sidewalk when I saw her standing beneath the same streetlight as before. She was facing me again, unmoving, that same red coat, that same silent gaze. But this time, something shifted. She took a step forward. I froze. My heart raced so violently I felt it in my throat. I looked around, no one else in sight. Just the echo of my own footsteps and the growing whisper of wind through the trees. She was now on my side of the street, slowly approaching. I should have run. I should have shouted. Instead, I whispered, "Do I know you?" She stopped. Then, softly, she said the word that unspooled something in my chest like a snapped thread, Birdie. It was the same name from the dream, the one no one had called me since I was a toddler. Only one person ever used it, my mother, according to a story my dad had once told me. I barely remembered it, just some bedtime tale he shared once when I was 5, half asleep in his arms. "Why did you call me that?" I asked, but the woman only smiled, a sad, trembling smile, and turned around. Wait, she didn't stop. She walked away, disappearing around the corner without another word. That night, I didn't sleep. The next morning, I told myself I'd imagined it, that grief could do strange things, that maybe I was stressed and my mind was playing tricks. But by then, the cracks in the foundation were too wide to ignore. The third time I saw her, I didn't let her walk away. It was raining again. I was under the awning of a bakery, waiting for the storm to pass, when I saw her sitting across the street on a bench, hood down. Something about her posture, slumped, wary, made me cross without thinking. "Why are you following me?" I asked, standing just a few feet away. She looked up slowly. Her eyes were rimmed red, but her face was gentle. She didn't flinch, didn't pretend not to know me. "I just wanted to see you," she said. My heart stopped. Do I know you?" My voice was shaking now. "Did you know my mother?" There was a silence. A deep, raw silence that stretched like a knife's edge between us. "Everything your mothered?" she whispered. The street, the rain, the sound of traffic. It all vanished. There was only that sentence, looping over and over in my mind. "I am your mother?" I backed away, stunned. "That's not possible. My mother died. She died when I was 2. She shook her head. "No, Birdie. I didn't die." I don't remember what I said after that. I don't remember crossing the street again or how I got home. But I remember sitting on my bed, drenched and shaking, the photo from the attic clutched in my hands. And for the first time, I let myself believe what I had already known deep down: she wasn't lying. That woman, who looked at me with eyes that mirrored my own, was the same woman from the photo. My mother and my father had lied. What kind of lie was big enough to erase an entire person? I waited until after dinner. My father was watching one of his true crime shows in the living room, reclined in his old chair, the glow of the television reflecting off his glasses. I stood in the hallway for a long time, photo in my hand, trying to build the kind of courage you don't realize you need until you're already trembling. When I finally walked in, he didn't even glance up. "I need to talk to you," I said, louder than I intended. He muted the TV slowly, as if annoyed, and turned toward me with a neutral expression. "What's up?" I walked over and held out the photo. He squinted at it. The second his eyes registered what it was, I saw the change. The slack in his jaw, the way his hand slowly lowered to his lap, his mouth opened, then closed again. "Twice? Where did you get this?" he asked quietly. "In the attic," I replied. "It was in a box labeled books." He leaned back. His hands trembled slightly, just a flicker. But I noticed. He set the photo down on the coffee table as if it were burning him. "Who is she?" I asked. He looked at me for a long time. Then, in a voice so calm it felt rehearsed, he said, "That's someone you don't need to know about." I felt something snap inside. "She told me her name was Leela. She said she's my mother." My father froze. I took a step closer. I saw her. She knew my nickname. "The one you told me only Mom used?" "Still?" He said nothing. "Why did you lie to me?" I whispered. His eyes filled with something I couldn't identify. "Guilt? Regret? Fear?" "Because you were too young to understand," he said, "and I needed to protect you." From what? From her. His voice had an edge now. Not anger, desperation. He stood, slowly, as if trying to assert control. "She left, okay? She walked away. She didn't want to raise you." I stared at him. "That's not what she said." His hands were shaking more now. He looked older than I'd ever seen him. "You don't know the whole story?" he said. "Then tell me. Right now?" There was a long pause. He sank back into his chair and rubbed his temples like someone trying to delay the inevitable. "You were too," he began. "We'd been fighting for months. She had problems, mental health, depression. She refused help, and one night she just walked out, said she couldn't be a mother anymore." I listened in silence. I begged her to come back. "Not for me, for you." But she said she needed space, that she wasn't ready. She signed away her custody willingly. "I raised you. I did everything I could." I could hear the edge of sincerity. He wasn't lying, at least not completely. But he wasn't telling the whole truth either. "She didn't die in a car accident," I said flatly. "That's what you told me." His face crumbled. "I know," he whispered. "And I'm sorry. It wasn't enough? Not even close. You didn't just hide the truth, you erased her." My father's shoulders dropped. He looked like a man who had been carrying a weight too long and was finally buckling under it. "I thought it would be better that way," he said, barely audible. "I thought if you believed she was gone, you wouldn't grow up resenting her for leaving. Or resenting you for keeping her away." The silence between us was thick with the weight of 16 years. Finally, I said, "She's sick." "She doesn't have much time." My father flinched. "She's dying?" I repeated. "And I'm going to see her again." He didn't argue. He didn't try to stop me. He just nodded slowly, his eyes unfocused. As I turned to leave the room, he said something I wasn't prepared for. "I still have the letters," he murmured. I paused. "What letters?" He looked at me, eyes glassy. "She wrote, 'Every year on your birthday.' I never mailed them. I kept them in a drawer." "Why?" He swallowed hard. "Because I couldn't bear to read them." That night, I cried harder than I had in years. Not just for the mother I had been denied, but for the father who had been too broken to tell the truth. The letter came 2 weeks after my grandmother passed away. We'd buried her under a gray sky on a Monday morning. I hadn't cried much at the funeral. Her decline had been slow, predictable. She was my father's mother, stern and distant, never the affectionate type, but she had always sent birthday cards, always asked how school was going. She'd seemed loyal to my dad, and by extension, to the version of my life he had constructed. That's why I didn't expect her to be the one who finally cracked it open. The letter was hidden inside an envelope labeled simply, "For her, when she's old enough." The lawyer handling her estate handed it to me after the will reading, a quiet afterthought that everyone else ignored. It was handwritten. Slanted cursive, delicate strokes, my name at the top: "My dearest, if you are reading this, then I am gone. I hope you are strong. I hope you are still kind, and I hope you've started to wonder. There are things your father never told you. Some truths that he buried, not out of cruelty, but out of fear and shame. Your mother's name is Lila Monroe. She is not dead, she never was." I had to stop reading. I sat down on the edge of my bed, hands shaking, heart pounding against my ribs like a drum. The world tilted slightly under the weight of her words. I read on. She loved you. I know that for certain. But after the divorce, things grew complicated. There were fights, custody battles, pain, and your father, well, he was different back then. Harder. He didn't trust her, and he didn't forgive easily. I tried to stay out of it, but I saw the letters she wrote. The ones he never gave you. She visited once. I let her in. She cried in my kitchen and left you a stuffed rabbit. Your father threw it away before you woke up. I know this is a lot. I only hope you find the answers you deserve. Love always, Grandma. I folded the letter, numb. My mother hadn't died. She had been alive this entire time, somewhere out there, writing letters, crying in kitchens, being turned away by the people who claimed to love me. I didn't know what to do with the emotions that flooded me. Rage, grief, guilt. My father had robbed me of her, and my grandmother, in her quiet way, had tried to give her back. I went downstairs, the letter clutched in my hand. I didn't tell my father I had it. Not yet. Instead, I turned on my laptop and typed the name, Leila Monroe. At first, nothing, then, not hers, but for a woman in a small town called Fair Hollow, listed among the mourners. Or dear friend, Leila M., then a bookstore newsletter archived online, featuring a local poet and former teacher, Leila Monroe. My heart pounded harder with every click. She was real and suddenly so close. At the bottom of one site, I found a post dated just 6 months prior. A poetry reading, a photo of her standing beside a microphone holding a thin booklet. Her face, older, lined, but unmistakably the woman from the photo, my mother. I printed it out and pinned it to my wall. Fair Hollow. That was the next step. The place Grandma had hinted at but never named outright. A small town just a few hours away, tucked between hills and rivers and years of silence. I packed a small bag. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. Not even my best friend, not even my father. I told myself it was just a visit, just a way to make sense of everything. But deep down I knew. This was the beginning of something much bigger than a visit. It was the beginning of the truth. Fair Hollow wasn't on most maps. It was one of those sleepy towns you only stumble upon when you've taken the wrong highway exit and run out of signal. As I drove past the wooden "Welcome to Fair Hollow" sign, I felt a strange weight in my chest. Like I was walking into a memory I didn't know I had. The streets were lined with tall oak trees, their branches arching overhead like a cathedral. The town center had a single traffic light that blinked yellow. A bakery, a florist, and a secondhand bookstore flanked the square, all painted in soft pastel colors that looked like they'd faded decades ago. I parked near the post office and walked. People here didn't rush. They nodded politely, moved slowly. I felt like I'd stepped into a snow globe, everything calm, preserved still. And yet, as I passed the cafe on Main Street, an older woman sitting by the window raised her eyes and stared, just for a second. But it was unmistakable recognition. I paused. Inside the cafe, she leaned forward slightly. Then another man, sweeping the steps outside the bookstore, froze mid-motion as I passed. His eyes lingered on my face. I wasn't imagining it. These people knew me. I ducked into the florist's shop. It smelled like damp soil and lavender. A woman in her 60s looked up from behind the counter. "Help you, dear?" she asked. I hesitated. "Do you know someone named Leila Monroe?" She blinked. "Why do you ask?" "I think she's my mother." Her hand went to her chest. For a moment I thought she might cry. "Oh, child," she whispered. "You look just like her." My throat tightened. "She used to live just up the hill," the woman said. "A little blue house near the ridge. Moved there about 10 years ago." She's still there?" She's been in and out of the hospital recently. Not sure if she's home now. But if you head up Mulberry Lane, you'll find the place." "Thank you." I walked out, dazed. The bookstore man was still watching me. As I turned onto Mulberry Lane, a cluster of emotions flooded my chest. Dread, hope, sorrow, anger. The blue house was easy to find. It sat quietly at the end of the lane, small and weathered, with wind chimes dancing from the porch and flower pots crowding the steps. No car in the driveway. I walked up slowly, knocked once. No answer. I turned the knob, unlocked. I stepped inside. The air smelled faintly of lavender and something else, like warm tea and old books. The living room was cozy, full of knitted blankets and stacked novels. A photo sat on the mantel, a black and white image of a woman holding a baby. Me. I walked toward it slowly, touched the frame. That's when I heard it. A creak behind me. I turned. An older man stood in the doorway, pale blue shirt, gentle eyes. "You must be her daughter," he said. I nodded slowly. "She told me you might come someday." She here?" He shook his head. "Hospital. She's been there since last week. But she'll be glad to see you." I followed him out without saying another word. My heart thundered the entire ride to the hospital. Fair Hollow was quiet, but its people carried secrets like candles in the dark. And now, one by one, those candles were beginning to flicker into light. The cafe was tucked between the hardware store and the laundromat, A faded sign swinging above its door, the Blue Finch. It had lace curtains in the windows and mismatched mugs hanging behind the counter. When I walked in the next morning, after a sleepless night of pacing and rereading my grandmother's letter, I wasn't sure what I was looking for. But the old man behind the counter looked up, and something in his expression softened before I even said a word. "You're hers, aren't you?" he asked gently, drying a mug with a cloth. "Lila's girl?" I froze. "You knew her?" he smiled wistful. "Everyone around here knew Lila, quiet woman, kind, always sat in that booth by the window, same order every time, Earl Grey tea and toast with apple jam." He nodded toward the corner. I turned and saw the small booth, worn cushions, a chipped table. There was an indentation in the seat, as if someone had sat there every day for a long, long time. "She'd come in at 9 a.m. on the dot," he continued. "Always brought a book. Sometimes she'd write. Poetry, mostly, but what I remember most was how she'd stare out the window." "At what?" "Nothing, really. Just waiting." She never said, but I always figured she was watching for someone who never showed up. The words hit me like a blow to the chest. "She was waiting for me?" I whispered. He gave a slow, solemn nod. "She used to tell me about a little girl named Birdie, said she had the softest laugh, wouldn't nap unless she was on her chest, and how one day she just disappeared." I sat down in her booth, barely breathing. "She never stopped loving you," he said. "Even when the town talked, even when people told her to move on. She'd show me the birthday cards she never mailed. Little poems, tiny stuffed animals she'd buy and keep in a box. Why didn't she fight for me?" "She tried. At first. But she didn't have much. And your father, well, he had more power than people think. Lawyers. Friends in the right places. Lila didn't want to drag you through a custody battle." He paused. "So she let you go. But she never stopped watching? Hoping?" I couldn't speak, I could barely sit upright. It was like someone had lifted the curtain on 16 years of silence and poured the truth into my lap. "Does she still come in?" I finally asked. "Not much lately, she got sick, weak. But I send her tea from time to time." He reached behind the counter and pulled out a small box, worn and wrapped in twine. "She asked me to give you this, in case you ever came." I took it with trembling hands. Inside was a stack of folded napkins, each with short lines scrawled in ink. Poems. Notes, some were stained with tea, others faded at the edges. One had my name written in tiny script. "Birdie, I hope the wind still makes you laugh. I hope you still hum when it rains. If you ever come back, I'll be here. Just by the window. Love, Mom." I wept, quietly, in the same booth where she had once waited for me day after day. The cafe owner didn't interrupt. He simply poured a cup of Earl Grey and set it gently in front of me. "Welcome home," he said. Her journal was in a drawer by the hospital bed, tucked between tissues and a faded photograph of the two of us. A nurse handed it to me when I came to visit the next morning. "She writes in it every day," she said, "even when her hands hurt too much." The room smelled of antiseptic and something softer, lavender lotion maybe. My mother, Lila, lay in bed with tubes curling around her wrists and nose. Her eyes were closed, face pale and sunken, but peaceful in sleep. I held the journal in my lap and opened it gently, careful not to crease the pages. The handwriting was neat, delicate, each line written with care. October 7. I saw her today, just for a moment. She crossed the street like a flame, that same determined look I remember. "My Birdie." I didn't speak. I couldn't. I don't know what I would have said. But she's grown, and beautiful, and I hope someday she'll forgive me. My throat tightened. The entries stretched back months, years even, some brief, some full of stories. A record of all the things she hadn't been able to say out loud. Her memories, her regrets. April 12. I held her once while the snow fell outside. She was just a bundle of softness, wrapped in a yellow blanket. She liked when I hummed Golden Slumbers. I think that's the song she'll remember if anything lingers. August 19. The court date was awful. He looked at me like I was nothing. His lawyer said I was unstable. They used my panic attack against me. I told them I loved her. But they said love wasn't enough. I signed the papers. I didn't know what else to do. I closed the journal, unable to read anymore without crumbling. My heart felt split between two lifetimes. One I had lived and one I'd been denied. She stirred then, her eyelids fluttered. I stood, unsure if I should speak, but then her eyes opened. They were duller than I remembered, but still unmistakably hers. "You came," she said, voice raspy. "I did." Her lips trembled into a smile. "Birdie." I reached for her hand. It was cool, fragile. "Why didn't you try harder?" Her eyes filled with tears. "I did. I wrote. I visited your grandmother. I fought until I couldn't afford to anymore. And then I thought maybe it would be better for you. A stable life, a clean break." "It wasn't better," I whispered. "It was just quiet." She nodded slowly, her thumb brushing my knuckles. "I thought about you every day." I sat beside her, journal still pressed to my chest. "I read it," I said. "I was afraid you'd hate me." "I did. For about 20 minutes." She chuckled weakly. "That's fair. We didn't say much more that day. I stayed beside her until she fell asleep again. Outside the window, the sky was turning pink with sunset. I watched as a breeze stirred the trees, soft and slow. Later that night, I opened the journal again. There, tucked into the last few pages, was a line written just days before. I don't want her to remember me as the woman who disappeared. I want her to remember me as the mother who never stopped writing, never stopped hoping. Maybe words can be enough. Maybe they're all I have left. And maybe they were. The conversation with my father wasn't planned. I had returned home from Fair Hollow 2 days after reading the final journal entry. I hadn't called ahead. I simply walked through the front door and stood in the living room, journal in hand, watching him glance up from his usual spot in the recliner. He froze when he saw me. There was a flicker in his eyes, relief, maybe, or fear. "You're back?" he said, voice tentative. "I saw her," I replied. He didn't ask who, he didn't have to. He sat up straighter, rubbing his palms over his thighs. "What did she tell you?" "Everything." He let out a breath like a balloon slowly deflating. He didn't deny it. Didn't pretend to be confused. He just looked down at the floor. "She had a journal," I said. "Every year, every birthday." Still, he said nothing. "She never stopped loving me." That seemed to sting. His lips parted, but no words came. I sat across from him, not out of comfort but necessity. I needed to hear the rest, directly from him. "Why did you lie?" I asked again, softer this time. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Because I couldn't stand the thought of you going through what I did." I blinked. "What do you mean?" "My father left when I was 10, he said, told me he'd be back. Never came. My mother wasted years waiting for him. I watched her unravel. I promised myself I'd protect my own child from that kind of abandonment." I shook my head. "But she didn't abandon me." "She did for a time," he insisted. "She left. She walked away. Because you made her feel like she couldn't stay." His mouth snapped shut. I held up the journal. "This proves it. The court battle, the panic attacks. You took advantage of her lowest moment and pushed her out of my life." He winced. "No. But it was cruel." A long silence stretched between us. "I kept her letters," he said finally. "Every birthday. I told myself I would give them to you when you were older. But each year, it got harder." "Why?" He looked away, ashamed. "Because I was afraid you'd choose her." I stared at him. For all his coldness, all his control, it was this sentence that exposed him, small, scared, and selfish. "I was never supposed to choose," I said. "I was supposed to have both of you." His eyes filled with tears, the first I had ever seen on him. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I really thought I was doing what was best." "But you weren't," I replied. "You were doing what was easiest for you." He nodded slowly, and for once, he didn't argue. He didn't defend himself. I opened the journal and slid it across the table toward him. "Read it?" He didn't move. "I already did. It broke me open, but it also stitched something back together. You should know who she became. What you took away." He looked at the cover, fingers trembling slightly, and then back at me. "Are you coming home?" he asked. I stood. "No, I'm going back to Fair Hollow. She's dying. I don't have time for second chances anymore." He bowed his head and I walked away. That night, as I packed a small bag and prepared to return to the town where she waited, I received a message. It was from my father. No long speech, no apologies, just a photo, a shoebox opened. Inside, stacks of unopened letters, birthday cards, tiny gifts, and a message beneath it. "They're yours. I'll be here when you're ready." I didn't reply, not because I was angry, but because some wounds take longer than words to heal. And this story wasn't his to finish. I had always thought of my stepmother Anna as distant but kind. She never raised her voice, never tried to replace the mother I thought I'd lost. We coexisted politely, shared dinners, exchanged gifts on holidays, made small talk in the car. I never questioned her version of events because I never thought she had one. But after confronting my father, I knew she had to have known more than she let on. So, I asked her to meet me at a diner on the edge of town, neutral ground. She arrived wearing a gray coat and no makeup, her expression unsure as she slid into the booth across from me. "You talked to your dad?" she asked. I nodded. "And I know the truth," I said. She closed her eyes for a moment, then opened again with a long, measured breath. "I've wanted to tell you for years." "Then why didn't you?" She stirred her coffee, staring down into the swirling cream. "I met your father just after the custody hearing," she said. "He told me he had full custody, that your mom wasn't in the picture. I asked why. He said she left, that she was unstable. I believed him. And later." She looked up at me, her eyes watery. "I started seeing things. Letters. Envelopes with your name on them that he kept hidden. He burned one in the fireplace once. Said it was for your own good." I stared at her in disbelief. "You knew he was lying?" "I did," she whispered. "But by then, I was pregnant. We had your brother. I didn't want to break our family apart. I felt a wave of nausea. You let him erase her? I didn't let him, she said, voice trembling. I begged him. I begged him to let you write to her. To at least tell you the truth when you were older, but he wouldn't bend. Tears spilled down her cheeks. He was terrified of losing you, but I was terrified of what it would do to you if you ever found out on your own. Well, you were right about that. She reached into her purse and pulled out a folded piece of paper. I wrote her once, she said. Without your father knowing, I never got a reply. I don't know if she ever saw it. She slid the paper across the table. I unfolded it with shaking hands. Leela, I don't know if you'll ever read this. I'm not writing as a wife or even as a mother. Just as a woman who sees another woman in pain. Your daughter is bright, and kind, and curious, and there is a gap in her heart even if she doesn't know it yet. I hope someday she finds you again. Anna, my chest ached. You tried? I said softly. She nodded. I did? I should have done more. I should have fought harder. But your father, he wasn't the man I married, not after he shut the door on her. I looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time not as my stepmother, but as someone caught in a lie too large for either of us to control. I'm not angry at you, I said, but I can't come back to that house. Not now, she nodded. I understand. We sat there a while longer. The silence between us was heavy but not hostile. When we finally stood to leave, she hugged me. Not tight, not long but real. Tell her I'm sorry, she whispered. I will. As I walked away, I glanced back once. Anna stood at the diner window, one hand on the glass, watching me go, and for the first time I saw not a villain, but someone who had loved quietly and failed just as quietly. I saw her again in the hospital, 1 week after the truth unraveled like a skein of thread. This time there was no hesitation, no walls between us. She looked smaller in the bed than I remembered, as though her spirit had pulled inward to make room for the pain. But when I walked in, her eyes lit up like a match in the dark. Bertie, she said softly. Hi, Mom. That was the first time I called her that since I was 2 years old. She cried quietly, the way people do when they don't want to scare away joy. I sat beside her, brushing a strand of hair from her face. You look tired? I am, she admitted. But I feel more awake than I have in years. I pulled out a book, the one of poems she'd written long ago, and read to her. She listened with her eyes closed, breathing slowly, her hand curled loosely around mine. Each day after that, I came back. I brought her tea from the Blue Finch, arranged her photos on the windowsill, and read to her the letters she never got to send. Some were silly, updates on my imaginary friends. Others were heart-wrenching birthday wishes written in trembling script. One afternoon, I arrived with a bouquet of fresh daisies, her favorite. She looked at them with wonder. I forgot how much I loved those, she said. We'll fill your whole room with them, I replied. We talked about everything in those days. How she met my father at a college protest, how she used to sing to me while I napped on her chest, how hard it was to walk away when the courts made her feel like a danger instead of a mother. I wanted to stay, she whispered. But every time I tried, he reminded me how broken I was. I said, maybe not, she agreed, but I was afraid. And sometimes, fear feels a lot like failure. We didn't spend our time on regrets. We built new memories instead. I brought her a record player, and we listened to the Beatles while we watched the rain streak the window. She taught me how to fold paper cranes, and I made one for every year we had missed together. 16 in total. I hung them above her bed with string. One evening, just as the sun dipped below the ridge, she turned to me and said, "If this is all I get, I'm okay with that." I squeezed her hand. "It's not all. Not yet," she smiled barely. "You always were an optimist. I think I got that from you." She gave me a small wooden box the next morning. No explanation, just a look. Inside were tiny relics, a pair of baby shoes, a folded drawing of a stick, figure girl and a tall woman holding hands, a lock of baby hair tied with ribbon, and a gold locket. I opened the locket and found 2 photos, one of her younger holding me, and one of me as a toddler, eyes wide, smile crooked. "I used to wear it every day," she said, "until it hurt too much." I wore it home that night. The second week, she started fading. She slept more, spoke less. Her voice grew thin, her touch lighter. I stayed overnight, pulled a chair to her bedside. Read her final entries aloud from the journal. One of them said, "If she remembers me at all, I hope it's as someone who tried, not as someone who failed." She passed away on a Thursday morning. No dramatic moment, just a final breath, soft and slow as I held her hand. I kissed her forehead and whispered, "You were enough." Outside, the first snow had started to fall. And though I felt the grief curl deep in my chest, I also felt something new. Peace. After the funeral, the world moved on more quickly than I expected. People offered their condolences like pre-written scripts. "She's in a better place now. She knew you loved her. At least you had time together." I nodded, said thank you, but most of their words passed through me like wind through an empty room. What grounded me was the memory box. I kept it with me always, on my nightstand at the cottage I rented in Fair Hollow, then later in my bag when I went home to pack. It wasn't much, just a few objects. But each one carried the weight of a lifetime we'd never shared. The baby's shoes were soft, frayed at the seams. She'd written the date I first walked on a slip of paper folded inside one. The drawing, crude and childlike, was clearly mine. The stick figure with a swirl of red marker hair was her, my mother, with a heart drawn between us. I couldn't have been older than 4 when I made it. The locket, though, became my daily companion. I wore it around my neck, tucking it beneath my sweater where only I knew it was there. A quiet symbol of something I had finally reclaimed. One rainy morning, I sat cross-legged on my floor and laid each item out carefully. That's when I noticed something I hadn't seen before. Taped to the underside of the box lid was a folded note. It read, "If you're reading this, it means we finally found each other. I'm sorry for the time we lost. But I'm grateful for the time we found. Every birthday, I whispered your name. Every new year, my darling birdie, my heart never forgot. Love, Mom." I wept then. Not from sorrow but from something else. Wholeness. The truth hadn't come easily. It had been wrestled from silence, scraped out of hidden letters, and read from tear-stained journals. But it was mine now, and it had changed everything. I returned to the Blue Finch Cafe one last time. The owner had framed one of her poems and placed it by the register. He handed me a box of her things she'd kept stored there. Books, a half-finished manuscript, and a sealed envelope addressed to me. Inside the envelope was a list, just a simple one. Numbered. Go see the coast, adopt a cat, learn to cook something besides soup, fall in love, even if it's scary, keep writing. Don't forget me. I smiled through the tears. I wouldn't forget. I carried her memory like sunlight through stained glass. Fragmented, colored by pain, but beautiful nonetheless. And for the first time I felt something I never expected. Gratitude. For a mother who waited. And for a truth that finally found its way home. Time shifted after the funeral. It didn't slow down, it simply blurred. Days melted into one another, wrapped in a fog of healing that never quite announced its arrival. I stayed in Fair Hollow longer than I'd planned. I couldn't return to the city yet. My father called once, then again. I didn't answer. His messages were quiet, strained. Just wanted to know if you're okay. I found some more things from when you were little. I understand if you're not ready. I wasn't. Instead, I walked the streets of Fair Hollow every morning. I sat in her booth at the Blue Finch, sipping her favorite tea, rereading poems she'd once written on napkins. I volunteered at the library where she used to host readings. I even planted daisies in front of the little blue house on Mulberry Lane. Her house. It was mine now. The key had arrived in a legal envelope just weeks after her death. Her lawyer explaining that the house was paid for, left to me in her will. Inside, everything remained exactly as she left it. Pillows plumped. Books mid-raid. Her handwriting on a grocery list taped to the fridge. I didn't change much. I couldn't. The second winter came quietly. I hosted a small gathering for her birthday. A few townspeople came. The cafe owner, the florist, a neighbor who once helped her shovel snow. They brought stories, gentle laughter, and daisies. After they left, I sat by the window, the same one she had stared through year after year, and wrote in a new journal. This time, the story was mine to tell. I wrote about her kindness. Her loneliness? Her unshakable hope. I wrote about the things she taught me in absence, in the brief but sacred time we'd shared. And slowly I began to understand something. Grief was not a wall, it was a door. A passage. You didn't escape it. You walked through it, piece by piece. One morning, nearly a year later, I received a small package in the mail. The return address was my father's. Inside was a photo album. Each page held images I'd never seen, pictures of me as a baby, my mother beside me, smiling, eyes full of sleep and joy. There were notes in her handwriting on the backs. Little dates, little memories. Tucked between the pages was another letter, from him this time. I've spent the last few months reading her journal. I see now what I didn't back then. She wasn't perfect, but she was never the enemy. I'm sorry I made her one. If you ever want to talk about anything, I'll be here. No expectations. I miss you. Dad. I sat with the letter in my lap for a long time. It didn't undo what had been done. It didn't erase the years. But it was a beginning. I didn't call him right away. But one evening, on the anniversary of the day she first called me Birdie, I dialed his number. We didn't talk about the past. Not much. We just sat in the quiet and shared a memory. I remember she used to sing to you, he said. She wrote that in the journal. She was always better at lullabies. He admitted, we didn't fix everything. But we stopped pretending it hadn't broken, and sometimes that's enough. Grief, they say, doesn't end, it only changes shape. I understood that best during the quiet evenings in the blue house on Mulberry Lane, where her presence still lived in corners and sunlight and the worn indent in her favorite chair. 3 months after that first phone call, I saw my father again. He came to Fair Hollow, unannounced, and waited for me outside the cafe. He looked older. Not in the way time usually ages a person, but like someone who had finally begun to carry his own mistakes properly, without excuses. "I didn't come to fix things," he said quietly. "I came to listen." We walked along the river trail side by side, saying little at first. The wind scattered leaves and the air held that soft, cold weight that only comes in early spring. "I read every letter she wrote," he eventually said. "I didn't understand then. I do now." "Why didn't you leave her be?" I asked, not with anger, but with exhaustion. He stopped walking. "Because I was scared of losing you, of being seen as the one who broke everything. And now? I know I did break everything," he said. "But I also know you don't owe me anything, not forgiveness, not a relationship. Nothing." The clarity in his voice startled me. It wasn't the defensive man I had known. "I'm not sure what we're supposed to be now," I said. He looked at me, eyes filled with a complicated sadness. "Maybe we just try being human." We didn't hug. We didn't cry. But when he walked away, I didn't feel the coldness I expected. Just space, wide, open, painful, but also clean. A few weeks later, I made a decision. I wrote him a letter, not to restart what was lost, but to thank him for trying, finally. I told him about the garden I planted behind the house, about the cat I'd adopted. I included one of her poems, my favorite one. "Some birds leave not because the branch is weak, but because the sky is calling." That was the last poem she wrote before she died. I found it tucked between pages in her journal, written in a shakier hand than the rest. The Blue House eventually became a place where people gathered. I started a small poetry group, opened the doors for readings. People came, they sat in her booth at the cafe, they brought flowers. Each year on her birthday, I'd tie a paper crane to the oak tree out front. By the 4th year, the branches were full, and my locket, I still wore it. Not out of grief but out of gratitude. For the woman who waited, for the man who finally confessed, for the story that nearly disappeared, but didn't. Because I found it. Because she waited for me. Because in the end, truth always reaches its child. These stories show the consequences and limits of family relationships, especially between parents and children. Even the deepest connections can be broken by fear, pride, or silence. And yet, in the quiet spaces left behind, love sometimes finds a way back through time, truth, and courage. Have you ever uncovered a hidden truth about your family? Something you weren't supposed to know? Share your story in the comments below. Let's talk about it. And if this story moved you, subscribe for more like it.